The Classical Greek Influence on Keats and Eliot by Ziza Cooper Hovland. I was first introduced to ancient Greek myths and culture through D'Aulaire's book of Greek myths and then became obsessed with Percy Jackson. I loved the stories of the gods and goddesses fighting each other, and I loved the human stories of the heroes and heroines who bested their adversaries. As I grew up, I became more interested in the art and culture of the time. I saw the statue of the Athena Parthenos built by Phidias and was fascinated by the realistic form and texture the artists were able to get out of stone. The Greeks built a foundation for art that has been drawn on throughout time. The classical period of Greek art and culture has had an enormous influence on almost every subsequent generation of artists. Their emphasis on realistic human form shaped the way artists viewed and went about making statues and figure drawings. Every new artistic movement has looked back at the classical Greek ideals and interpreted them in their own way. John Keats and T.S. Eliot are two authors from different periods that both have classical Greek influence in their works. Keats wrote in the Romantic era, a period characterized by its emphasis on emotion and natural beauty. His poem, Ode to a Grecian Urn, very clearly shows the Hellenistic slant of his work. In it, he mainly examines truth, beauty, and an old vase. Eliot wrote in the modern era in the early 1900s, and he struggles through some big questions that many artists at the time grappled with, such as the meaning of life, what happens after death, and if he's allowed to roll the bottom of his trousers. His poem, Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, is a keystone in modernist literature. The two poems are structured quite differently. Ode to a Grecian Urn is an ode, a classical form of poetry. An ode traditionally uses a specific object as a metaphor or tool for discussion of a larger idea. In this poem, Keats uses the image of a Grecian urn to discuss the nature of, quote, truth and beauty. Keats, line 49. According to Klaus Hoffmann, it is a, quote, nostalgic reminder of a vanished condition, end quote, because though the poem uses beautiful imagery, there is a sense of sadness that surrounds it. All of the scenes described are trapped in whatever moment they were created in. The groom is mid-wedding and will never kiss his bride. The pipes are playing silently for no one to hear, and the spring trees will never shed their leaves. It aligns with the Romantic era's proclivity for natural and pastoral imagery. It follows a traditional A-B, C-D-E, C-D-E rhyme scheme and is in iambic pentameter. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, however, is much less strict in its rhyme scheme and meter. The rhyme scheme is inconsistent between stanzas, and line and stanza lengths vary. Most stanzas have 12 lines interspersed with 2 lines that serve almost as a chorus, while some stanzas have 6 or 8 lines. This inconsistency was a break from tradition and made people reconsider what made a poem a poem. It is in a stream of consciousness style that was relatively new at the time and represents the way thoughts meander and go off on tangents. Eliot opens his poem with an epigraph taken from Dante's Inferno, while Keats, according to Stephen Holland, quote, enters imaginatively into the world of antiquity, end quote. Eliot is a more internal exploration of thought and observation. In ancient Greece, art was held in high esteem. Some believed great art was divinely inspired. The Greeks held beauty above all else, so being able to make something beautiful was a sought-after talent. Both poems reference pieces of art. Keats' entire ode is a contemplation on one piece of pottery. It prompts an emotional and contemplative response from the speaker. This is in line with both Romantic and classical Greek views on the power and significance of art. Eliot's artistic reference is the repeated refrain, quote, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Eliot, lines 13 through 14. In the sentence, it's not actually Michelangelo who is the subject, but the women. The art is more of an afterthought than something that elicits an emotional response. The reference to the coming and going also gives the conversation an air of flightiness. A multitude of women are going in and out of a room, talking about something that really doesn't matter, especially in light of the time period. This poem was published in 1915, about a year into World War I, while parts of England were being bombed. With that in mind, the discussion of Michelangelo seems to be insignificant. At the time, knowledge of the arts was a symbol of education and status that could be shown off to acquaintances to prove your worth. The discussion may be a way the author shows that on the whole, the conversation is meaningless. This is a break from the classical view that art is a good source of conversation that adds meaning to life. Eliot characterizes this conversation about art as vapid, not something that can be deeply enjoyed, as opposed to Keats, who finds truth in a vase. To the Greeks, the human form was the best example of beauty and perfection, and accurately capturing it was a valued skill. In Ode to a Grecian Urn, Keats mentions the human form without much detail. He includes references such as, quote, unravished bride, Keats, line 1, thy shape of deities or mortals, line 6, fair youth, line 15, marvel men and maidens, line 42, when old age shall this generation waste, line 46. The emphasis on youth in correlation with goodness and beauty is in line with traditional Greek views. His description on the whole gives an impression that there is a sort of tragedy in the fact that the figures on the vase don't age. Though old age wastes a generation, while the figures stay in their perfect youthful image, there is an emptiness in it shown by the line, quote, beauty is truth, truth beauty, line 49, which is an empty comparison. Eliot's description of the human form is more modern in its understanding. His description of the male form is slightly uncomfortable. With a balding spot in the middle of my hair, they will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Eliot, lines 40 through 44. He sees the effects of age on himself and does not like it, shown with the lines, quote, I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, line 84. Later on in the poem, he questions whether he should, quote, part his hair behind, line 122, to hide the effects of baldness. In the lines, I grow old, I shall wear my trousers rolled, lines 120 through 121, the reader can sense the weariness he feels. Rolling his trousers could either be a reference to a fashionable style at the time or the necessity of shortening his pants due to his sinking stature. The speaker is characterized with obvious insecurities about the way he looks. He isn't strong and muscled like Greek statues, but is thin and balding. The only other men described outside the speaker are, quote, lonely men in shirt sleeves, line 72, which is another rather bleak picture. Brian Clifton, author of Textual Frustration, the Sonnet and Gender Performance in the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, characterizes this as, quote, anxieties regarding a failed masculine performance, end quote. Eliot's portrayal of the female form very clearly corresponds with the Greek ideal. He never describes the complete female counterpart to his speaker, but he does describe part of a woman, and the you addressed in the poem could very well be a female partner. The speaker describes, quote, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight downed with light brown hair, arms that lie along a table or wrap around a shawl. Lines 63 through 64 and 67. This description emphasizes fairness and beauty, both qualities held in high regard by the Greeks. The arms and the women represented are objects of desire and distraction. There is less room for imperfection in Eliot's descriptions of women than in his descriptions of men. These descriptions of both the male and female form point to the fact that though Eliot doesn't only represent the Hellenistic ideal, he still subscribed to the superiority of youth and beauty that was idealized in the classical period. In the classical Greek period, truth was something that was frequently pondered. Plato's cave allegory is a metaphor to describe the different layers of understanding the true nature of something. In Keats' ode, the line, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty," 49, seems to be a deep statement on the nature of truth, but when analyzed, it's clear that though it connects the concepts of truth and beauty, it says nothing about either of them. If truth is beauty and beauty is truth, then neither idea means anything. This statement is attributed to the figures on the urn. This means that this definition of truth isn't necessarily the one that's applicable in the real world, just the one that the urn in its trapped state can perceive. In Eliot's poem, almost nothing is what it seems. The narrator seems to be very unsure about most everything. It turns what is expected on its head. It is called a love song, yet the imagery is decidedly unromantic. The metaphors used are unexpected. The narrator insists there is time, yet fears death. All of these combine to make the reader unsettled and question what tangible truths there are to hold on to. The speaker questions who he is and what he is allowed to do. In the end, nothing is ever made clear, which is perhaps a statement on truth itself. Both authors still struggle with truth, just as the Greeks did, and none of them seem to be able to come up with a solid definition. Indeed, the essence of truth seems to have become more ambiguous as time has gone on. Keats and Eliot struggled with similar ideas. They both drew from some part of the classical Greek ideas, either in structure or in their ideas about what beauty or truth is. They interpreted the Greek ideas about art and tried to find answers to questions that were raised in their generations, partly through those ideas. These two authors are very different, but both valued the ideas of the past and reshaped them to fit their current cultural ethos. They were able to pick and choose which parts they agreed or disagreed with, just as artists have done for generations, and still do today.